Okay, so I want to talk about how to get more detail out of shadows and highlights. Sometimes these can be problematic areas of your images and you're struggling on like how to make them better. So what's the best way to, fix that? And so the number one thing is, of course, when you're dealing with digital imagery, that you want to come in and work from Adobe Camera Raw, right? Work on your settings to just try to increase, in this case, like this shadowy area. Um, and I have a bright sky in the background, like how I can work to decrease the relative contrast, get more detail in here. I don't have very much detail in here. So, I'm gonna come in and just decrease my highlights a little bit. Definitely going to increase my shadows, pull my shadows up just to get some more shadow detail in here. I want to be careful with my whites because I don't want my highlights, the red is showing places where I'm clipping. So sometimes I pull back on my black, whites, and highlights. So I avoid clipping those, but at the same time, it also allows me to increase my exposure a bit, to increase the contrast in here. So just to get a sense of the before and after, that's before, that's after, right? So that's already an improvement. Now, some might argue there's a little too much detail in the foreground, right? So maybe I could use my gradient tool and decrease this, pull this like this. So, oops, I don't need to go quite that far, but that's kind of allowing me to bring in more detail into the trees and especially into the shadowy area. So that's like going to be my first stop for doing something like that. Then in Photoshop, opening up in Photoshop, I also have a couple. I have one additional great tool that I can use, especially for shadows here, and it's under Image, and it's called Adjustments. It's called Shadow Highlights. Now, traditionally, this used to be something they could only do to a rasterized image file, and it was it was a destructive, permanent type of thing that you had to do your image layer. Luckily now, Photoshop allows me to make these things called smart filters, and that's what's going to happen now. It's going to open up a smart filter. It's going to be kind of within my image layer, so it's not an adjustment layer, but it's in my image layer. And I can go back to it. And so it opens up the shadows highlights, and you can see, whoa, it really brightened up my shadows. It almost looks like a totally different picture. So you can start off in the simple mode here, and then if you want more detail, you click here. But we can start here with the shadows, and we can just, if you decrease the percentage, then it's just going to decrease how strong the effect is, right? So if it's too strong, then it looks silly. And I just need a little bit more, I think. But then I could click show more details, and it'll give me a couple more two more sliders I can play with. And the tone range kind of just affects like how much of the tonal range is being affected by the amount. So like, is it a narrow, the really darkest blacks and shadows, or is it also affecting some of the highlights? So the higher you have this up, the more the midtones you'll see affected by it as well. So I really don't want to overdo it here. So the radius, I have no idea what it does, but it does have an effect. So you can seems to almost be like relative contrast. So actually pulling that up I like the effect of that. And then maybe, I don't know if I want to do highlights, but I might bring that so that you can see it kind of comes down a little bit. But you have to decide, like, do I like the way this looks? I may just do this for the very, very, very brightest things and not so it doesn't affect so much the house. You'll find something happy. And then very bottom adjustments has to do with color shift, how how saturated the color is, because this tends to take away color saturation. So it usually starts with plus 20 as a default. I'm going to leave that there. And then the midtones, if you're finding an issue with midtones, this can help. But this also is another thing that kind of affecting contrast in the midtones, because sometimes you lose midtone contrast with this. So you may find you don't need it, or you may find you actually like it. I'm gonna click OK, and then it's there. And I can turn that off to see what it looks like without it again, and then just see how that's worked. So it's a really great tool there. You can also try to use, if you just need to bring down, or you make things not as black, or make things not as pure white, once you've lost total detail, like this is a great image because I still have a lot of detail to pull from. But in images where you just don't have detail, it's been clipped essentially. And I'll show you a good example of this one. This is a good one, just overexposed. But there's some redeeming qualities to this photograph, and with some more work, probably you have to do some work in here and in here to get the contrast right and making it look pretty good. You know, I might want to darken that down a little bit for starters. But if I wanted to print this out, you can see my point I have marked here. It's just blown out, and so is down here this snow. It's just almost full pure on white. So if I printed this like on a sheet of paper, the problem is going to be is I'm going to lose my tonality along the edge. I'm not going to it's just going to be print paper white, which means that I won't have kind of a rectangular photograph. I'll lose the edge. Especially right along here and along the bottom. And so that could be kind of create an awkwardness. I usually like to make sure I have like, you know, a sense of where the image ends on the paper. So there's a simple fix for this. And that is if you go into your levels, down at the bottom, this bottom slider affects output layer levels. Right? So normally they're going to be at 0 and 255, meaning that you have the full tonal range to your capacity. But if you wanted to like say, well, I want to restrict how white something can be in the image. I want to make it not a full 255. Let's make it 245. Then that means like the very highest value that your image can have would be 245. And that's just a little very light gray printable tone. So if I decrease this, and I want you to watch what's happening over here in my number 1 level, it was at 252, 252, and now it's down to 242 because I took this down by 10 points. And so that'll make it printable. And so that's something that's also handy and comes in to play some more times than you might think. So I hope that helps you with some ways to get more detail out of your images.